Hey folks, welcome back. So once again, for Halloween Horror Month, we're looking at the Yellow King role-playing game. So last time we looked at the amazing core set of the 4 main books, and I promised to show you the physical shock and injury cards, which you can see right in front of you here. And I thought while we're doing that, we won't look at all the cards because that would take ages and be super boring, but we'll flip through. I'll show you, the nice quality of them and some of the more interesting ones. And then we'll take a quick look at the new expansion, Black Star Magic, one of the 2 new books that just recently came out for the game. And this one, as you might expect, adds some rules for casting spells to the game, which is pretty cool. There are indeed cards for that printed in the book and in the PDF, but they don't have a physical version of those. I'm hoping that will change at some point in the future, but we'll see. So without any further ado, we'll start looking at the cards. Now, if you remember the basics of the rules, in the horror mode of the game, basically if you have 3 shock cards or 3 injury cards at any one time, you are insane if they're shock cards, or you are dead if they're injury cards. In either case, you are no longer playable. If you play in occult adventure mode, you raise that number to 4. So shocks come about due to different attacks from creatures, or due to encounters with the supernatural, things that you weren't expecting, that the character finds difficult to adjust to given their sense of reality. And each card will have a specific name, be attached to a specific incident or type of creature or influence on your character. So a lot of these are surprisingly specific. And as you saw in the game itself, each volume in the core set has its own set of additional cards to represent the new threats that are present in that era. You can see each card will have a name. Just to remind you here that the type is a shock card. And then there'll be some rules text. And the rules text will affect your character until you're able to discard it. And there's normally text that tells you how to discard it, or in some cases how to trade it down for a less severe card. So in this case we have Distracted. It's a shock card, so it's a mental attack basically. So you have -1 to your focus, and after a focus test failure, spend 1 from the pool of any focus ability to discard this card. Okay, so once you spend 1 point from the pool of any ability that falls under the focus category, you'll be able to discard this out of your hand, and then no big deal. But then we have more severe stuff like reality collapse, right? So this is a shock card, but you get -2 to sense trouble tests, and you lose 1 health each time you make a push. Remember, pushes are ways to get kind of additional information out of an investigative check. So you can trade this down for must have been a hallucination on a success that restores normality to the world. Obviously, that'll be up to the GM to kind of adjudicate. And just for a sense of comparison, if we look at must have been hallucination, which you can trade down from this one, you only get -1 to sense trouble, and just discard it when you discover a core clue, which should happen a lot because it is a gumshoe game. So you get kind of a basic idea there. And the more common cards, sometimes there's more than 1 of them. No mask, no mask. They all have interesting names as well. A trick of the light, surely. Discard on a successful test that furthers the anti-Carcosa cause. Okay. A beastly sight. Test take a penalty equal to the number of shock cards you have in hand. Discard by killing or helping to kill the being or another one like it. So the discard conditions can be pretty stringent at times, so you really want to be careful about the amount of shock that you're taking, and be careful about your point spends during battle in particular. Now, the Black Star Magic book, I believe, will introduce new types of cards that can basically add to your shock total but give you a benefit. So there's a risk-reward kind of element going on there, but we'll see as we look at the rules. We got Waves of Grief, Stunned and Saddened. So here, if somebody dies, you might get this. Lose 1 composure at the end of each scene in which the deceased is mentioned. At the end of the session, if you have more composure in your pool than any other player character, discard this card. Okay. Rationality's Cruel Veil. Haunted. Got a couple of those. Existence is a meat grinder. That's interesting. Shock and continuity. Okay, so test take a penalty equal to the number of shock cards you have in hand. Discard after participating in an event that restores your faith in humanity. Well, that's a pretty high bar, especially in a horror game like this. Witness to Carnage, Hackles Raise, and remember as well that you can't just sort of call for tests to help you discard these cards. The GM will decide when a test is called for, and that'll only be when it's relevant to the story, when there might be a chance of failure. So when you get a card, it is a big deal. So we got Tremors, The Will Erodes, Annoying at the Back of the Mind. What's that? -1 to composure. When you take another shock card, spend 1 composure to discard this one. Okay, so you can kind of swap that out if you get another one. Cursed. Discard when the person who cursed you releases you from the curse or dies. If still in hand at the end of the scenario, you inexplicably die. Okay, it's pretty hardcore. The curse is thinking about being cursed. +1 to sense trouble tests. Lose 1 health on any character's sense trouble success. Discard when the person who cursed you releases you from the curse or dies. Okay, so less severe than the curse itself. Images seared in the mind. A touch of the shakes. Shattered Illusions. Take a presence penalty equal to the number of shock cards held by the PC other than you, holding the highest number of shock cards. Discard when you witness an act of redemptive altruism. Okay, maybe a first aid test or something like that. Humans are the true monsters. -1 to presence. Discard when you witness an act of redemptive altruism. Okay, so that's the less severe version of Shattered Illusions, I suppose. Collywobbles. That's a great name. -1 to focus. Discard by nullifying the consequences of a previous setback. Interesting. Butterflies. Okay, so just discard at the end of the scene. That's straightforward enough. Song of the Sign. Whisper of the Sign. Hardened. When you make a ruthless choice that saves a life, spend 3 composure to discard. Okay. And we have the Shudders. We got a diverting indiscretion will put this in perspective. -1 to presence, discard by taking a risk to indulge a vice. All right. So maybe go get hammered to get rid of that one. Rattled, reality horror. -1 to focus. At the end of a scene in which you take the lead in gaining a core clue from a GMC, that's a Game Master character, roll a die. On an even discard, odd, give this shot card to another player. Ooh, that kind of sucks for them. Skewed reality, ill-omened. Jinx, players to your left takes -1 to tests. Discard when that player fails a test. Alright. Some of these are actually linked to other players. That's interesting. Sick with worry, lose all of your health or composure pool, whichever is higher when you make a push. If the pools are equal, you choose. You receive this card through concern for another. Discard by conclusively solving that character's main problem. Wow, okay, that could be quite an ordeal to go through to get rid of that. Pity is a lesser version of that. Dread, -1 to presence and focus tests. After any such test, roll a die. On an even result, trade for unease. And unease is your next presence or focus test, take to -1 penalty, then discard. Okay. Much easier to get rid of. Violent impulse. Ooh, look at all the text on that one. After 2 or more intervals, the GM specifies that you strike violently against another PC. Test fighting, spending 2 points if available. The PC tests athletics, with your result as the difficulty. Taking the injury card abrasion, laceration, scratched, or roughed up, GM chooses. After completing the action, roll a die, discarding this card on an even result. GM must wait 2 intervals before triggering the effect again. Discard when entity is destroyed. Okay, so whenever the entity that caused this violent impulse is destroyed, you can get rid of this. Or if you score an even result after beating the hell out of your comrade, which doesn't sound great. Influence. Okay, the GM may require you to make a difficulty 5 composure test. On a failure, you take a subtly destructive, barely detectable action specified by the GM that would please the entity that gave you this card. After completing the action, roll a die, discarding this card on an even result. GM must wait 2 intervals before triggering the effect again. Discard when the entity is destroyed. So again, that's the lesser version of the violent impulse. We've got alien passion. You love the entity responsible for you taking this card and may not act against its interests as you reasonably understand them. Discard when the entity is destroyed. Not by you, of course. You can also be enthralled. You can question your senses. -1 to presence. Discard when something you thought might be unreal turns out to be real. Okay, so when your senses actually turn out to prove correct, you can discard. We have uncertainty, agitation, being unnerved. That's an easy one. Discard by using an investigative ability to gain information, which you'll do all the time. Bit of a sticky wicket. -1 to focus. When you escape your current predicament, discard and roll a die. Odd, gain the shock card unnerved. Ooh, okay. Oh dear. Discard by finding a means of escape. So you see there's a lot of interesting results in those bits of rule text there. You can end up with shock cards that actually are affected by the presence of other players or by the actions of other players. And what I'll do is just put these off to the side here so we can look at the book in a bit. And now we'll take a quick look through the injury cards. These are fun as well. So some of these are due to hazards, like we saw this one in the rule book. If you're having trouble and drowning, basically, you can get a lung full of water. So you take -2 to tests. As an immediate recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success, or at the end of next interval, trade for cough, choke, splutter, which is the lesser version. -1 to non-focus tests and discard at the next interval. Remember, there are different measurements of time in the game, the interval being one of the shorter ones. Then we have intoxication, -2 to tests, +2 to tolls. So that'll be bad for a fighting situation. On a failed test, make a bad drunk decision. Have 2 hours world time, trade for tipsy. Tipsy is non-lethal. Well, that's good. So non-lethal means, remember that if you get this card as your 3rd or 4th card, depending on whether you're playing horror or occult adventure respectively, it won't kill you. But if you get this card as your 2nd to last card, and then the next card is a lethal one, you'll still die, because it'll still count as a card in your hand. So -1 to tests. On a failed test, make a bad drunk decision. Discard after 2 hours world time, or after a test to avoid injury. Okay, so less penalties than with being full-on intoxicated. Superhuman smash. Health, athletics, and fighting drop to 0. As recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success, trade for on the mend. Okay. Superhuman blow. Roll a die. On an even, health drops to 0. Odd, athletics drops to 0. Discard as recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid test. If the margin is greater than 2, refresh the affected pool. Oh, that's helpful. Sucker punch. Lose 2 health. Roll a die. Discard after that number of successes. Okay. You can be roughed up as well. Broken jaw. Fearsome gut punch. -2 to physical and focus until end of interval. -1 until subsequent interval. Then roll a die. On an even, discard. If not, then discard it. Keep trying at each new interval. All right. Ringing cranium. Ouch. -2 to focus and presence, and -1 to physical test. After 4 hours of world time, trade for blow to the head. That one is just -2 to sense trouble. Okay. Arterial spray. Wow. If your health exceeded 4 when you took this injury, -1 to physical test, otherwise -2 to physical test, discard as recipient of difficulty 4 first aid success. Pretty impressive yet superficial cut. Okay. So these you spend 2 health to discard, some of these. Monstrous battering. -2 to physical test counts as 2 injury cards. Oh boy. Trade for on the mend as recipient of difficulty 6 first aid success. If still in hand at end of scenario, trade for permanent injury. Yikes. Picked up and thrown hard. You can be restrained. Strong-armed. Eviscerated. Yikes. Counts as 2 injuries. You can't make physical tests at all. After 6 hours of world time, trade for on the mend as recipient of difficulty 6 first aid success. After 12 hours of world time, difficulty of that test drops to 4. Okay. You can get clawed. Heavily sedated. Roll a die. You remain unconscious for that number of hours, world time. If all characters get this card, they all wake up confined and in a bad situation. When you wake up, trade for muzzy-headed. And that one just says lose 1 point from all presence pools. At the end of next interval, regain these points and discard this card. All right. Slash throat. Yikes. Can't take tests or make pushes or do anything but lie on the ground bleeding out. As a recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid with success, trade for a stab wound. Okay, well that's better. And that one you can discard after a physical or focus success, so that's much better. But you can see the major injuries often have, multiple steps to resolve them. You need to pass some kind of test, or somebody needs to first aid you back to life, basically. And you can trade down to a lesser injury if you're lucky, and then, do another thing to get rid of that card. And some of these injuries are so bad they count as 2 cards in themselves. So if you get another one after that, you'd be dead already. Cudgel blow. Okay. What else we got? Throttled. Lose 2 health. Honor after 1 interval. Trade for choked as recipient of difficulty 4 first aid success. Okay. Draggy. Badly hurt. -1 to physical and focus tests. Precarious recovery. Jarred. Just discard at the end of session. Okay. And again, dazed. -1 to all tests and discard at end of session. Okay. Permanent injury. All right. So this is going to stick with you past the end of the session. On the mend, -1 to all tests, trade for still hurting on a physical success. And we have massive injuries, count as 2 injury cards. Until the end of interval, you can't make tests. Therefore, -2 to physical and -1 to focus tests. If scenario is not over at end of session, trade for on the mend. Okay. It's a miracle you're alive. They do have such great names for these. Black and blue, crushed, contused, -1 to physical test, discard on a physical success. Okay. Find the antidote. So the scenario ends with this card still in hand, you die. Discard by finding the antidote. So you've been given some kind of poison, obviously. Mostly resistant, so maybe you've been poisoned, but it doesn't bother you that much. You can't spend health points on tests. At the end of each interval, roll a die. On an even result, discard. In the blast radius. Okay, this is another one that can lead to a permanent injury if you still have it at the end of the scenario. Thrown free of the explosion is a lesser version of that. You can be shot, you can be grazed, you can be burned. -2 to tests except preparedness. Trade for badly hurt after you fail a test and then receive a difficulty 5 first aid success. Singed. To make an interpersonal push, you must also spend a composure point. At any time after the next interval, you may spend 1 health to discard. Alright, you can get a turned ankle or a hard landing. So again, tons of variety, lots of different in-game effects, and I do like the fact that there's no real hit points as such. Sometimes you need to spend health to get rid of those cards, but really it's about how many cards you have in hand. It's very easy to just look at what's in front of you and feel the fear of death impending. So now we'll take a quick look at this new book here. This is Black Star Magic. You can see it's a smaller size, much like the regular books for the Yellow King. It's the same size as the original core books. Some of the other expansion books are kind of A4 size, which is a bit confusing, but there you have it. Quick look at the back. So, Ritual Magic of the Belle Epoque, the desperate science genre of the war-torn continent. Parageometrical horrors perfected in the labs of the tyrannical, overthrown Castaigne regime. Signing, the latest way to turn social media dysfunction into a sorcerous reality. Your players can master them all at perilous risk. Each spell is a shock card with effects both useful and sinister. Do they hold on to that spell they need to do that thing even as their inner realities start to break apart? Or do they take the safe route and cast out the buzzing, insistent power of the yellow sign? Black Star features new magic rules for the Yellow King role-playing game, including 144 startling spells, background material on Carcosan magic in all 4 YKRPG settings, and GM guidance showing you how to incorporate player-facing occult powers into your game. Plus a quartet of scenarios, allowing the characters of each sequence to make double-edged deals with the world of sorcery. Oh, that's fantastic. So you get one scenario in each of the core books, and you get one additional scenario for each of those books in this one as well. So that must mean the magic rules are fairly straightforward. Otherwise it would make a whole lot of sense. So now that we're cracking this open here, we'll take a look at the TOC. So as we can see, first we've got a little bit of introduction, and then the basic rules of Carcosan magic, and how Carcosan magic manifests in different eras, I suppose. So we have Hermetic occultism, science jaune, parageometry, and signing, and then some GM guidance. And then we go straight into the 4 different scenarios. So that was one of the reasons I thought I'd throw this in with the quick video on the cards, because I won't spoil the scenarios for you. We'll just talk about the magic rules and have a look at some of the cards. So the introduction here is basically reintroducing the Yellow King role-playing game and offering the idea that they may be tempted to dip their toes into the sinister waters of Carcosa with the introduction of player-facing magic. Each of the game's 4 settings presents spells keyed to its particular flavor. In Paris, the trappings of their deadly power mimic those of the city's thriving, feverish, occult scene. Whether the characters befriend heretical Martinists or ceremonial adherents of the Golden Dawn, whether they dabble in spirit mediumship or ectoplasmic summoning, the spell chapter of this book has the shock cards they'll covet. Yes, to gain the ability to work efficacious sorcery, player characters must keep shock cards in hand. How long do they risk psychic dissolution before letting them slip out of mind once again? Or do they embrace it, sacrificing themselves to Carcosa in order to destroy Carcosa? In the wars, the study of magic takes on the language of technology. Naturally, it's a cruel and twisted version of science, the magical complement to munitions research. The ex-insurgents of Aftermath encounter magic in the form of parageometry, the perverse discipline of the overthrown Castaigne regime. Finally, the everyday investigators of This Is Normal Now encounter magic as in a hip, viral-ready form as signing. All the influencers are doing it, and nothing is remotely out of the ordinary about that. In addition to these 4 flavors of soul-warping supernaturalism, the opening chapter provides the guidance you need to incorporate them into your game. Then it describes the 4 scenarios, so we have Dancer at the Bone Cabaret, pits the art students of Paris against a force that lures their bohemian friends to the latest, hottest night spot. But are they the patrons, or items on the menu? Cascadet Lethil sends the supernatural squashing soldiers of the wars into a village haunted by subterranean enemy activity. Memories of a Dream Clown confronts the victorious revolutionaries of Aftermath with a treasured but tarnished memory of childhood and murder. Finally, Love Wears No Mask finds This Is Normal Now's ordinary heroes battling an intrusive yet enthralling phone app and the dramatic goings-on of the subtly destabilizing daily reality show it promotes. Play them separately or chill your players with all of them. All they have to do is lose their grip on reality. It's a great intro. Okay, so Carcosan magic. So for investigators, magic is not just fleeting, but also costly, risky, or both. Magic taxes its human users mentally, physically, and morally, and all magic derives from Carcosa. So the rules for player-facing magic are as follows. Spells appear as shock cards. Players gain them by fulfilling conditions in a scenario. The characters might need to locate a written spell, learn it verbally from a GMC, or take part in a rite conferring supernatural perception. Continuity spell cards are tagged as such in their subtitles. This tag comes into play in the case of spells that affect other spells. We'll provide more guidance on placing them in the game starting on page 65. But first, a look at magic in the setting and the spell cards themselves. Okay. So the Yellow King investigators can acquire 3 degrees of knowledge regarding a particular spell. So there's awareness. Through the use of their investigative abilities, they discover that a spell exists but don't have a copy of it. Access. By overcoming obstacles in scenes or spending pushes, the group acquires a copy of the spell. Its form factor varies depending on the sequence. So in Paris, it'll be a printed page or page from an old grimoire, or it could be a sheaf of scribbled notes, an alchemical oil, stuff like that. In the wars, it would be a set of steps laid out as one would the elements of a scientific experiment in a folder marked top secret. Or it could be an unstable serum to be injected into the user's veins with a syringe. In the aftermath, it would be dense mathematical formulae and a binder marked with the emblem of the Department of Parageometrical Inquiry. Or it could be a reel-to-reel tape containing an eerie voice reading off instructions in an oddly stilted rhythm. And This Is Normal Now, it could be a post on a dark web forum, an adulterated dose of LSD, heroin, or cocaine, an encrypted thumb drive, a transparent layer in a PNG graphics file, all kinds of interesting stuff. So the final step then is gain. After acquiring the instructions, the next step is to learn them, gaining the spell. If this is the first time the investigator has ever tried to gain a spell, the attempt succeeds, no roll or spend required. Gaining a spell requires the investigators to spend at least an hour of world time, devoting full concentration to the task in a safe and distraction-free environment. The process differs for each spell. Describe the process with a memorable detail or two for each spell, key to the effects of its occult tradition and effect. For specific plot reasons, you might create an exception to this rule, allowing the instant learning of spells a character carries. Don't do this for cards with the discard at will discard condition. If your storyline really demands it, provide a modified version of the card with some other discard condition. Gain spells buzz like a fever in a sorcerer's mind, sowing distraction and giving rise to unwholesome thoughts. Physical symptoms might include profuse sweating, jittery movements, rapid blinking, and of course, a mask-like pallor. Characters can only gain spells by choosing to do so. Every now and then, you might stretch the definition of choosing by having a character unwittingly gain a spell as a consequence of some other willing choice. That's interesting. When a spell is later released, so after you've gained it, the effect appears in the world. The hideous subvocal chittering of the spell abates, as do the outward symptoms. As often as not, the magician trades the psychic dislocation of holding a spell in the mind for some other emotional disturbance arising from the effect. So, in other words, you might cast a spell and gain a different shock card in return. An investigator who can still access a spell can attempt to regain it, but gets harder each time. The first attempt to regain a specific spell requires a difficulty 4 composure success. The difficulty increases by 2 for each subsequent attempt. Alright, then we have the eras of Carcosan magic, which we'll just sort of hum past, since I think we got a little bit of flavor of that from the introduction anyway. So here's some specific ways that you could bring occultism into the Paris setting. So things like Theosophy, Tarot, blah, blah, blah. And here we have some example spells. So let's see, we've got Abjuring Circle. Spend X composure as your character makes an unbroken 3-meter diameter circle of salt on the ground. For the next 10x minutes, world time, alts and Carcosans can't enter the circle. Well, that's handy. Discard by spending 1 composure. Or you could have Assert Dominion. Kill an invasive or mutant by trading this card for the major injury it deals in combat. Render it helpless by trading for its minor injury. Wow. So you take damage yourself, but you instantly kill the invasive or mutant on the other end. Banish. That sounds useful. Spend 2 composure to send every invasive you can see from Earth back to Carcosa. Discard at will. Wow, powerful. We have, let's see, Battle Luck, the Altered. -2 to fighting difficulty of alts. After a fight with 1 or more alts, roll a die. On an odd, trade for Stirred Up. Benevolence of Anubis. If a GMC you met during the current scenario is now dead, discard and spend 4 composure to reverse the timeline to 10 minutes before their demise. You and any other willing PCs who spend 2 composure each arrive at the GMC's side. Ooh, so you can go back in time and save somebody. That's pretty cool. Befriend the Beasts. Foes bearing the animal tag that would otherwise attack you instead seek your affection. Discard at will. Black Star Burst. The investigators have uncovered the core clue leading to the conclusion scene. You may spend 4 health to render helpless all foes in that scene. Wow. So yeah, I mean, you have to take the risk of holding this extra shock card in your mind and clearly having some outward symptoms of craziness, but some of these are pretty powerful. Alright, Collective Folly. After a fight against an opponent with a relative challenge of superior or higher, all PCs who fought refresh all pools. Discard at will. Cone of Purifying Energy. All PCs in combat against magic-wielding humans gain +2 fighting. Discard to cancel or reverse any magical effect wielded by a GMC. Cone of Putrefying Energy. During a scenario's climax or coda, spend 4 health. A chosen human murderer rapidly decays into reeking sludge. You and all PC witnesses must score difficulty 5 composure successes to avoid shocks. A beastly sight, or if you could only forget. And there's so many here. We got Counterspell. Spend 2 composure to cancel the ongoing effect of any GM character's spell, then roll a die. On an odd, discard. That's very useful, of course. Death, but not today. After 1 or more PCs gain injury cards from a hazard, spend 4 composure points and describe the latest moment when you could have made a different decision to avoid it. You leap back in time to that moment and must now take that action. Then trade for Flat Circle. Death Curse Carcosan. Trade for radiation poisoning to kill a Carcosan. Warning. To the king and his daughters, death may only last until the end of the scenario. Death Curse Construct. Trade for pinned by debris to destroy a construct. Okay, so you blow up Carcosan machine, but you end up pinned by its remains. That's interesting. Demonic Vision. Spend 30 minutes world time to invoke a masked-faced Carcosan spirit. You must correctly answer 1 yes or no question. The interaction alerts the king in yellow to your existence and present location. Yikes. Discard by spending 3 composure. But I guess if you really need some info, that'd be a way to get it. But to have the king in yellow know your existence and location is quite risky. Some of these are good recovery spells. You can discard Earth Tarot to refresh your athletics or mechanics. If both pools are full, you can't discard. Makes sense. You can exorcise a possessing entity from the body of a human victim. If the entity acts at the direct behest of the king in yellow, you must also spend 4 composure. Fire Tarot will refresh your fighting or riding. Fleshed Mask. Your face transforms into an exact replica of a human you have seen or spoken to. Spend 2 composure to regain your real face. If wearing another face at the end of scenario, trade for Stolen Visage. The 4 Ages. +2 to all tests when you can see an antagonist who is not subject to ordinary human aging. 4 seasons, +1 to tests to avoid outdoor physical hazards. Well, that could be handy. The game, roll a die. Even, all PCs refresh all pools. Odd, if this card is still in hand at the end of the session, you die. That is quite a game. Discard by using an investigative ability to gain a core clue. Okay, so at least you can get rid of this kind of possible death before the end of the session if you get a core clue. Guardian Angel, an unseen entity who may be an angel or the spirit of a deceased holy person, grants protection and occasionally communicates with you, often irrelevantly. Spend 2 composure to refresh Sense Trouble. Refresh Athletics on a Sense Trouble success. Inspired Research. After confronting a GMC who works magic, discard this card to gain the spell card that the GM deems most similar to the sorcerer's key power. Wow, then there's still more. Manifest the Sophia. Discard to allow all PCs who are not men to refresh 2 pools of their choice apiece. Or Masterful Presence. After making an interpersonal push, roll a die. On a 1, trade for Song of the Sign. On a 2 to 6, regain the push. Well, that's handy. So a 5 out of 6 chance of regaining a push is a pretty big deal since you only get 2 per scenario, I believe. Occult Grimoire. When you get this card, spend X preparedness. You now have a book containing X hermetic spells. At any time, make a difficulty 4 preparedness test. On success, you gain the spell you don't have that the GM deems most applicable to your current needs. Discard after gaining X spells or by destroying the book. Ooh, very nice. Gives you a great deal of flexibility. Liberation from the Void. When another PC's injury card requires first aid success to discard, trade this for Exhaustion of the Pleroma to gain that success without making a test. Discard at will. We have Open the Way, so spend 3 composure to open a locked or sealed door. Discard at will. Very handy. Like the good old knock spell in D&D, always useful. Piece of Shambhala. In any scene prior to the climax of a scenario, cause foes who would otherwise attack you to withdraw peacefully. They can't attack you again for at least an hour world time, and discard at will. Protective Amulet. Cool. When you receive a major injury, instead receive a minor injury. That's also handy. Discard at will. Sin Eater. Discard to allow another PC to transfer a shock card to you. Ooh, that could be good if somebody's right on the edge. Sidestep Reality. Before a fight starts, spend 4 composure points and describe the latest moment when you could have made a different decision to avoid it. You leap back in time to that moment and must now take that action. Then trade for Questioning Your Senses. Reassembly of Osiris. After holding for at least 2 hours table time, discard to also discard a continuity card held by another player. Roll a die. On an odd, you take that card. Revive the Dead. Trade for more things in heaven and earth to revive a corpse that has been dead for less than 72 hours so it can make good on a promise or obligation left unfulfilled by its demise. You can also speak to the dead. Spend 3 composure to ask up to 3 yes or no questions of a corpse that has been dead for less than 72 hours. All other PCs witnessing this must also spend 3 composure. Immediately after doing this, you may discard. Or you could be a spirit medium, so during a seance, you can invite a discarnate entity to communicate through you, vocally or with automatic writing. The entity always professes to be the ghost or supernatural being you seek, as this honesty may indicate otherwise. You may then choose to roll a die. On an even, discard this card. On an odd, trade for In Your Head. Okay, telepathy, that's cool. If you do not already have it, you may choose to take Nosebleed to share a thought dialogue with a willing accomplice you cannot see. Dialogue lasts for X minutes, where X is your composure rating. Well, that's cool. But then you get a nosebleed from working your brain too hard. Unpalatable. Vengeance of Hathor, that sounds cool. Spend 1 composure. All PCs gain +2 fighting against foes they have fought before at least once. Discard at will. Vessel of Mortification. Discard to allow another PC to transfer an injury card to you. Wizard Ward, that sounds useful. Discard and spend X composure. Designate X doors or arches in a building you are in. Any human GMC passing through any of them loses all gained spells. Oh, cool. Discard by spending 3 health. World Hole. You can spend 4 composure to turn any gate or portal in Carcosa into a gate to one of the game's other sequences. Ooh, so you can jump right from Paris to one of the other sequences. You may choose the sequence if you know of it from your investigation, otherwise the the result is random. When you do this, trade for Whisper of the Sign. So now we have background on the Signs Jaune, so this is during the Wars period. So the study of magic is becoming more scientified, I suppose. So you got here in the lab coat with formulae and the yellow sign in the middle there. And we got some new spells. Anti-weird. Spend 2 composure when you and another PC takes a weird weapon injury. Target PC refreshes all pools. Nice. Boom. Spend 2 health to detonate all hidden explosive devices within 250 meters of you. Then roll a die and on an odd result, discard. Cool. Death Exchange. Discard and spend 4 composure to allow a character that has left play after a final injury to return to life with no injury cards and all pools refreshed. If you do not kill an adult human within the next 24 hours world time, the PC dies again. Ooh. Trading lives. I like that. False Restraint. Anyone attempting to restrain you thinks they've done it but haven't. Discard at will. Galileo's Feather. All PCs you can see gain +3 to athletics or battlefield tests to survive falls regardless of height. Discard at will. Ghastly Rescue. If you've gained the core clue leading to the scenario's climactic scene, you may discard to summon a phantasmal dragonfly flown by a pallid-faced aircrew. It transports you back to headquarters, then flies off. Wow. We have Phantom Camouflage. Discard and spend X composure to render yourself invisible to aerial reconnaissance for 15x minutes. That's pretty good. Aerial assault is always a problem during the wars. Silent Guns. Discard and spend 2 composure to disable 1 artillery battery. Oh, that's also useful. Spatial Dislocation. Discard to allow all members of your squad, plus 3 others, to fit comfortably into any confined space bigger than a coffin. So you create a bit of a TARDIS space, bigger on the inside than the outside. Interesting. True Flag. You feel a nagging pain at the base of your skull whenever an apparent human you can see or hear is actually non-human. Oh, that's handy. You want to detect infiltrators. Undead Legion. If during a large-scale engagement you can see the corpses of 100 or more loyalist soldiers, you may discard and spend 2 composure. They animate and ensure at least a narrow victory in the battle. Dancing Fortress. Okay, if you've gained the core clue leading to the scenario's climactic scene, you may discard to cause a military installation to vanish from the face of the earth permanently. Wow. Alright, pretty cool. Well, now we get into parageometry, so this is during the Aftermath sequence, so the magic used by the Castaigne regime. And again, we have some new spells. Birds of a Feather. Discard to earn the grudging cooperation of a criminal who is not the scenario's main antagonist. Drop Corpse. Discard to conjure into being a freshly dead corpse matching any cause of death and any possible human morphology without being a copy of a specific person. Forensic Wrench. At the scene of a crime you took part in, leave convincing forensic evidence pointing to an innocent GMPC you have spoken with. Discard at will. Imperial Spear. Discard to spontaneously immolate yourself and all foes in the current scene, killing them all. Then roll a die. On an even, trade for extra crispy, and on an odd, you just die. Warning, for the king and his daughters, death may prove temporary/subjective. Yeah, that makes sense. Like a Rose. Discard to destroy all police evidence of a crime you took part in. Oh, that's handy. You know, it's great how these spells are so thematic. I mean, you know, this period in the kind of storyline of the main game, you know, you're kind of revolutionaries. And so having things that sort of get rid of evidence or, you know, you can drop fake bodies, this is all really useful stuff. Likewise, the spells that we've seen in the other sequences, they fit with those themes as well. It's really, really nice design work on these spells, I think. Nothing Sticks. +2 to politics tests. When the group gets a hit card, discard to also discard the hit. Oh, that's handy, because hits are a real setback. You're trying to reach your goals in the Aftermath. Parageometrical Notebook. When you get this card, spend X preparedness, and now you have a book containing X parageometry spells. At any time, make a difficulty 4 preparedness test. On a success, you gain the spell you don't have. The GM deems most applicable to your current needs. Discard after gaining X spells or by destroying the book. So that's the parageometrical version of the grimoire from the Paris sequence. Puppet Master. Telepathically remote control the body of a GMC you can see and once spent an interpersonal push on. You can control speech along with other voluntary functions. Spend 1 composure for each hour of control. Draw up again any time or when you lose visual contact. Then roll a die. On an odd, trade for rampant distrust. Okay, well that's kind of fair enough. Shuffle Off. Discard to die and come back to life at a time you specify in advance, or when someone is about to autopsy or damage you, whichever comes first. The Touch. You can touch a person and cause their closest relative to suffer serious burns. When a GMC disrespects you in your presence, you must score a difficulty 4 composure success to not do this to them. Okay, so you got a little bit of lack of control there. Ticking Clock. After sneaking into a place with guards, spend 2 composure to know precisely how much time you have before one of them enters the room you're in. Ooh, that's handy. Viewmaster. When you close your eyes, you can see what a particular person you once spent an interpersonal push on. Spend 1 composure for each 120-minute period of remote sight, dropping at any time or when the target falls asleep. Then roll a die. On an odd, trade for identity decentralization. Okay. And now we're into the world of This Is Normal Now, where we have signing. So this is a strange source of information concerning a place called Carcosa and the black star energy it emanates into our world. And by the way, the black star magic is referring to the fact that in the skies of Carcosa, the stars are black and the sky is white. Just so, in case you didn't remember that from our look at the core books. So now we've got signs. Browser history. When meeting a GMC for the first time, spend 2 composure to learn which interpersonal ability works best on them based on their broad marketing profile as assembled by data mining giants companies. That's cool. Burroughs Syndrome. Spend 2 composure to intuit the location of a so far unplayed core scene of a GM's choice. If no core scene remains, you pay no composure. At will, roll a die. On an even, discard. On an odd, trade for heroin addict. Okay. Cronenberg Syndrome. Spend 2 health to trade for body horror and organic weapon and discard at will. Cool. Dark Web Download. When you get this, spend X preparedness. You gain access to a file containing X +2 signing spells. Then you can make a difficulty 4 preparedness test at any time, and then you gain the spell you don't have that the GM deems most applicable to your current needs. Discard after gaining X +2 spells or by destroying the book. So again, another version of the grimoire, but adapted to the modern era. Dumpster Fire. Discard before a fight against a foe with a relative challenge of vastly superior or less. You automatically achieve your goal in the fight, but you and all other PCs take the foe's major injury card and lose all health and composure. Wow, okay. So I guess if it's a really, really bad foe that you couldn't possibly beat, this will at least let you achieve your goal, but you will lose all health and composure and get major injuries across the board. Find my phone. Make a difficulty 4 composure test to teleport your smartphone to your hand. Or difficulty 5 to fully repair a broken smartphone with data intact. Failure, trade for I am my phone. Discard at will. Alright. Influencer. During a dialogue scene with GMC, spend 2 composure to rewind time to restart the conversation from the beginning. At the end of the scene, roll a die, odd, trade for flat circle, and discard at will. Well, that's cool. Gibson syndrome. Discard while in possession of a GMC's hard drive or with access to their offsite storage. You have a vivid hallucination in which its data is personified as a grudging witness who answers your question for 10 minutes. Table time. Discard at will. Well, that's cool. Ligotti syndrome. Spend 1 health. A non-hostile GMC you are speaking to suffers the emotional state suggested by a shock card PC holds. Until the end of session, treat the text of that card as blank except for its discard condition. At end of session, roll a die for each time you did this. On an odd, gain bent moral compass and discard this card. Oh, PKD syndrome. I love all these references. Philip K. Dick. Spend 3 composure. You switch dimensional places with your Aftermath character, who appears with full pulls, all pushes, and no shocks or injuries. After playing that character for 1 hour, your It's Normal Now PC returns. Then trade for identity decentralization. Oh, that's cool. That's really going to mess with people's heads. I like that. Reset button. Spend to push while meeting a key figure of an organization. As long as you continue to hold this card or until you act against them again, members of that group forget their grudge antagonism towards the PCs. Discard at will. Oh, you can even summon a rampager. Discard to cause the nearest rampagers to converge on your location. If you're on scene when they arrive, you may direct them to attack the GMC or an identifiable group of GMCs, then gain the card across the line. Yellow Troll. Trade for a pact in yellow to place quasi-subliminal messages of the yellow sign in the social media feed of a chosen internet using GMC, causing them to make a mistake useful to your investigation. Chaos Vector. The GM may dock you 2 composure points at any time you cross an ethical line. When you drop to 0 composure, trade for a crossed line. Discard by taking a costly altruistic action. These are other shock cards that you can trade down to depending on the effect of the spell. So we have stuff like Extra Crispy. So when there was that flame-based sort of immolation of everything, if you could either die or get Extra Crispy. So you can't make tests or pushes. If you take another injury with this card in hand, you die. At end of session, trade for Precarious Recovery. And Flat Circle came up quite a bit for time-related stuff. -1 to focus. When you take the lead in gaining a core clue, roll a die. On an even, discard, and on an odd, lose 2 composure. Okay. It's a miracle you're alive. Massive injuries. We've seen those before. Heroin addict. That's a new one. Each day, world time, you must describe yourself taking a risk or undergoing a humiliation to score heroin. -1 to focus and presence test for 2 hours world time after you do so. At the beginning of any scenario, spend 3 composure and roll a die. On an even, trade for recovering addict. Well, that's good. I am my phone. That's a good one. Lose 1 composure whenever the GM catches you, the player, touching your phone. That's cool. The game leaking into real life there. Identity decentralization. Margins of your failed tests increased by 2. Whenever you take an injury card, roll a die, and on an even, discard. Well, that's interesting. So that's the card that you get when you bring in a character from another stream, Aftermath or the Wars or whatever. When you're playing with your identity, you can get this card. This actually seems quite interesting. Inhuman ideation. When any other player laughs due to the way you are treated by a GMC, you must spend 2 composure or take risky or inconvenient actions to lash out at the GMC. When you lash out, roll a die. On an even, discard. On an odd, a card gains the continuity tag. So it just keeps on going. Magician's Pallor. To make interpersonal push, you must also spend 2 composure and discard when you make such a push. A Magician's Tremor. On a physical success, spend 2 composure, it becomes a failure. On that spend, discard or spend 1 composure to trade for Mystery of Sacrifice. Okay. Oh, and the Nosebleed. I wanted to know what that was. -1 to presence and focus test. Discard on a failed presence or focus test. Okay. Overstepped Bounds. -1 on your next composure test, then discards. That's not too bad. Oh, and then we have some parageometrical exhaustion. -1 to physical and focus tests. When you fail a test, roll a die. On an even, discard. Parageometrical debilitation. Wow. -2 to physical and focus tests. When you fail a test, roll a die. On an even, trade for parageometrical exhaustion. So trade down to that. On an odd, trade for no, it can't be. Pinned by debris. So that's what we get for destroying the construct with that spell. As immediate recipient of a difficulty 5 athletics test, trade for beside yourself. Otherwise, your health pool drops to 0 and -1 to your physical test. Discard at the end of the session. Ooh. Okay, that's quite difficult. Radiation poisoning. Lose 1 health at the beginning of each interval. If your health is 0, count as 2 injuries. If your health is 0 at the end of the session, you die. Trade for On the Mend a day after you undergo treatment for radiation poisoning. Then we have a few repeats from the other decks. So Questioning Your Senses, Shot, Song of the Sign. I I think skewed reality was in there as well. Spiritual spiral. Discard by taking an injury while performing an act of altruism. If still in hand at the end of the scenario, you die. Oh my god. And then spiritual expenditure. So if you lose 1 health each time you activate a spell effect, gain a shock card, or discard a shock card. If health is 0, trade for spiritual spiral. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty bad. Stolen visage. Okay, so that's when you put on somebody's face temporarily, but you can also end up stealing it permanently. Face is permanently changed to that person you specified. Tenuous reality. -1 to focus test. When the discard condition of another shock card occurs, you may discard this card instead. Alright. Violent side. -1 to focus test. Discard by sucker punching someone who has nothing to do with the investigation. That's great. There's so many cards in here that make for interesting role-playing. I really would love to run this game as soon as I can. Yellow Doom, injury, shock, and continuity. If still in hand after 24 hours world time, your character dies. Discard by striking a significant blow against the forces of Carcosa. Cool. Alright, then we have some GM guidance. As you can tell from the fact that these rules appear in a supplement, not the core rulebook, the YKRPG doesn't need to have player-wielded magic in it at all. GMs who do use magic in their games will find that the design supports it as a sparing side element that crops up every now and again. Spells decrease character survival rates and impel players to undesired actions. Their mentally destabilizing nature keeps them in the realm of horror magic, not the fun and outlandish sorcery of the fantasy genre. I think we definitely see that from the cards. And some tips here on weaving magic into scenarios, which is very handy for a budding GM, of course. Some example tomes. So these are when you use the cards appropriate to each era that give you kind of a book of spells. There's some hot tips on how to deal with those tomes. They don't count as spell cards, but they are still shocks. Merely owning one of these unwholesome documents punctuated throughout with scribbled yellow signs gnaws at one's identity. Magic for GM characters. So in keeping with the player-facing nature of Quick Shot Gumshoe, neither foes nor other GMCs use the shock card magic system seen above. Instead, PCs deal with the effects of magic as they would any other obstacle in your storyline. When your investigators fight them head-on, magical effects may be reflected in a couple of ways. As the injury card sorcerer's foes deal, nearly any overtly forceful magic represents a basic hazard already represented in YKRPG. So for fireballs, for example, use the Singed and Bird injury pairing. For a water attack that drowns you on dry land, go with cough, choke, splutter, or lungful of water. You'll spot the cards that can sort of inflict the effect of that magic. The effects of magic can also appear as hazards, either physical or mental. Treat magical booby traps that injure their opponents as any other hazard, albeit ones that appear apart from everyday logic. Emotional or psychological harm done by magical encounters deal shock cards and require composure tests to resist. Magic wielded by GMC sorcerers otherwise simply occurs successfully unless interfered with by investigators. The magicians levitate that courage, place a surveilling demon inside a botte noire, materialize a pack of riot dogs, or synthesize a soul-eating batch of ecstasy. Never feel obligated to grant the investigators equal access to magic wielded by your antagonists. Minds touched by Carcosa can spontaneously create and propagate new spells without leaving them around for pesky protagonists to intercept and learn. Design new spell cards if you want, while ignoring the plaints of players who demand equal footing with your reality-corroding villains. Excellent. Then we get into the scenarios, so we'll just quickly flick through these. Again, they've got the scene zone diagram here, clearly flagging up which scenes are, early leads on, then deeper in, and the climax. That's a pretty scary looking individual right there, chewing on a bone, so it must be a ghoul or something. We've got nice color coding for the core and alternate scenes, as per usual. Again, I think the way these scenarios are written up is really GM friendly. Although this image is not as kind of nightmare fuel. The Outspoken Dead, The Passion of Aristide. And these are quite lengthy scenarios, so pretty cool. And then there's some new injury cards as well for some new antagonists. Some new shock cards. Bone Song, cool. Enthralled is actually not new. Yeah, some of these are ones we've seen before, but it's nice that they package up all the cards that you need in the scenario so that you can pull them out from the deck, before you run it, where you're going with it. Cascade at Lathiel, so this is set during the wars. So send the squad to a doomed village in disputed territory, and this has more scenes in it than the previous one. But I'm guessing a lot of these are going to be relatively shorter because they'll be focused more on combat or progressing to one place to another without dying horribly. But that could be totally wrong because this is a scenario about magic, so who knows. But yeah, there's some kind of enchanted bazooka with yellow signs all over it. That's pretty scary. And there's all kinds of battlefields stuff. There's stalkers. Some hideous blob with a face. Not cool. Lots of corpses, apparently. Incinerated papers. Yeah, pretty gross stuff. There's a lot of creepiness in this game, which really is my vibe. I'm very much into that. Then we have, again, the cards that you'll need for this scenario. Some of them are new. I think Rifle Hit is new. Lathiel Syndrome, that's definitely new. I don't know what that means because I haven't read the scenario. Some new shock guards, perhaps. Carcosan Gun. No, I think that's in the regular set. Vengeful Dead. I think that might be new. Poor Bastard. -1 to presence test. Discard by taking an action that benefits others and risks your taking an injury card. Oh, cool. And Memories of a Dream Clown. That sounds horrible. We're getting more complicated. We've got multiple pathways here and more scenes than ever. I love the amount of new scenarios in here. That's a nice surprise. I thought it was mostly going to be just magic cards, page after page, and there were a lot of them. But there's a lot of actual cool content here, playable content, and they give you some hot tips on using magic in your own campaigns as well. Oh, she's seeing the yellow sign and looks pretty shocked. That's not great. All right, there's also an alternate one-shot version. That's cool. Let's see. Cards, Neuropathic Swipe. Trade for On the Mend is recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid success. Neuropathic Disequilibrium. If this card and the next shock card you receive are still in hand at the end of the session, the shock card becomes a continuity card. When you discard a shock card, make a difficulty 4 composure test. On a success, discard this card too. Beastly Sight, Embarrassed, Humiliated, False Alarm, the Yips. Well, that's a new one. X equals the result of a die roll +1. Lose X composure. Discard as recipient of an X point morale spend. Grim Flashback. Okay, we got the identity decentralization thing. Got Puppet Masters. Got a couple new chits. Follow through and press ties. Twinge and Spasm of Guilt as well. Then we have Love Wears No Mask for the modern days. And this is kind of interesting. We've got some intertwined scenarios. So you can move between various core and alternate scenarios through different paths. Again, quite a few scenes. Those people wearing a mask. I guess maybe they're like Carcosan version of Anonymous, maybe? But it seems like there's some kind of creepy reality show going on from my quick skimming of the text here. Wow, that looks terrifying. Not a big fan of that. Ooh, some more creepy artwork. Okay, somebody being chucked. Interesting. Antagonist reactions. Then some new cards. Black and Blue, Badly Beaten, Touch of the Shakes. No Mask, No Mask. Cool. And there's some handouts as well. Well, a handout. Very cool. So that's a nice little book there. 144 spells, a full magic system for the game, and a bunch of new shock cards to represent them. Of course, as I said, I do hope they will print out a physical deck that you can use alongside the lovely cards they've done for the base set, for the injuries and the shocks, which are lovely, as you can see. But yeah, I thought I'd just throw in a little bit more content rather than just looking at the cards, which I thought, we won't look at all of them. It'll just be a few minutes long. So I give you a look at Black Star Magic. In the next video on YKRPG, we'll take a look at Legions of Carcosa, which is the new monster book. Slightly controversial due to its use of AI art, but that seems like kind of a one-off experiment so far. So fingers crossed that stays the case. But in any case, lots of interesting new monsters in there to look at. So look forward to that. In the meantime, hope you're staying well and as sane as you possibly can in this crazy world. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and please, if you can, drop a comment or a like and a subscribe on the way out if you feel like it. In either case, I look forward to seeing you, hopefully, in a future video and in the comment section below. All right, take care, and bye-bye.